Mr. Sergeant of Arms, invite the members into the chamber and close the doors. I hereby declare the House of Representatives of the 112th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee now in session. Will the members please stand? Will the visitors in the gallery please stand and remain standing through the Pledge of Allegiance? Representative Russell will serve as chaplain of the day. Representative Russell, you are recognized.
Thank you, Speaker. Members, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day that you have given us to assemble in this building on these hallowed grounds to do your work. God, we ask that you grant us your wisdom today, that you give us humility, grace, and clarity of mind as we serve the people of this great state. I ask that you keep us in good health and bless our country. In your name we pray. Amen.
Representative Russell will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Roll call.
Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 94 members present.
Let the journal reflect that Representatives Byrd, Carter, Cooper, Potts are excused. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Welcoming and honoring.
Welcome and honoring. Representative Whitson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request the Sergeant at Arms to escort our guests into the chamber.
Mr. Sergeant of Arms, escort the guests to the well, please. Representative Whitson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight is a special night. We're here to honor a legend of the General Assembly and the House of Representatives, the late Charles Sargent, Chairman Charles Sargent. Tonight we'll dedicate his desk on the House floor. But before that, we have honored to have his wife, Nancy, here with us tonight. Nancy, good to see you, and just thank you so much. Tonight we have a short film, and we're going to let the film do the talking as we honor Charles before we dedicate the desk. With that, Mr. Speaker, request that we run the film.
Yes, sir.
Charles was an adopted Tennessean. He was born and grew up in New York State. One of Charles' strongest characteristics was loyalty. He was incredibly loyal to his family, to the community he called home, and to the state that he chose to live in. If you were his friend, he was with you through thick and thin. He was loyal. He was incredibly loyal to Madam Speaker Beth Harwell, to the committee members, and to the House, especially when in those budget battles with the Senate. Charles respected the process of governing, and he respected those who took part in that process in good faith and was serving their constituents at the top of their mind. He viewed government as a calling, an honorable profession that demanded integrity and dedication from those that chose to serve and were chosen to do so. And he served in that way, honestly and with total commitment to the betterment of our state.
Charles was a dear friend, colleague, and confidant. I was elected in 2004, and Charles was one of the first members that I met. He invited me out to dinner the first week, and our friendship started. His lovely wife, Nancy, and my lovely wife, Marcia, became and are still very close friends. I learned so much from Charles Sargent. His institutional knowledge was second to none. His knowledge of the state budget was unbelievable. He had a strong love for Nancy, his family, and his colleagues. He loved Tennessee, Williamson County, and his country. I thank God for allowing me to serve with Charles Sargent. What an honor. Rest in peace, my friend.
So let me talk about my friend Charles Sargent. I remember the days when I first got to the General Assembly. I used to love going to Finance, Ways and Means. I hung out all the time, so much that people literally thought I was on this committee. And so after Speaker Pro Tem Lois DeBerry passed, the speaker reached out to Charles and said, who would you like to serve on this committee? And he thought of me. He called me. He said, hey, you hang out in my committee all the time. I know you have the time. I know you have the dedication. Would you like to serve on Finance, Ways and Means? And of course I said yes, because it was an honor, number one, for him to think of me, and for number two, to entrust this awesome responsibility to me. So I was honored to serve with him. I miss him tremendously. And I think of him often as I'm serving on the committee.
Charles Sargent, what a great legislator and an even greater person and a great friend. I remember the first time I met Charles Sargent. It was back in 2009, and I was just starting to campaign in my first ever quest for public office as a state representative. I was invited to meet with a few people in Nashville to interview about my qualifications and about my political views. It was Charles Sargent, Beth Harwell, and Steve McDaniel. I didn't realize at the time that these were the real leaders in the state legislature. Once I was elected, Charles always made an effort to include me and make me feel welcome. I remember being in awe that he seemed excited to hang out with me, a lowly freshman. I'll never forget that feeling and how I was inspired by his kindness. Tennessee is the fine financial state that it is today because of his statesmanship. I'm truly grateful that I had the opportunity to know and serve with him. I really miss Charles and his wisdom, his great personality, and his genuine friendship.
It's indeed a pleasure for me to say a few words about Charles Sargent. You know, one of the best byproducts of serving in the legislature is the people you meet and the friends you make. I had no closer friend than Charlie Sargent. We got along well from the start. I think maybe we had a little connection because we both like to work with budgets. He was Navy, I was Air Force. He's an R, I was a D, but we got along really well and became true friends. Charles always treated me very well, especially when he allowed me to stay on finance committee when he was the chairman, and he always recognized me and always let me have my say. But then again, I would also always never forget to ask for a break so Charlie could take that smoke. I remember also the thing I tried it didn't work, but I did it every time. I'd tell him that I would trade the tax base of my district with his district any day of the week. Charles Sargent was indeed a fine man. He is my friend, and I miss him.
I appreciate this opportunity to talk about my good friend and colleague, Charles Sargent. I first met Charles several years ago while working on battlefield preservation projects in Franklin. But I knew Charles was not only dedicated to Williamson County, but also to the state of Tennessee. And that's reflected in his commitment to make sure Tennessee was financially strong and ready for the future. Everything Charles did was to make sure Tennessee was the best in every aspect of financial strength and accountability for our citizens and for our state. I miss Charles, his leadership, his mentorship, and most of all, his friendship. And Nancy, we love you, and we know and we appreciate you sharing Charles with us for all those years. Charles made a lasting impact on our state, and I will always remember that, and so will every Tennessean. Thank you, Charles, for all you did for all of us.
Charles loved history. That's one thing that he and I had in common. And he would refer to me sometimes as his history go-to guy. And the story he liked to tell was once we were in Philadelphia visiting Independence Hall. He said, you know, Steve could tell me even the seats that people like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson sat in. He said, I couldn't believe it. Well, what Charles didn't know was I'd been there numerous times, and I had taken a little review before he and I took the tour of Independence Hall. Wonderful guy. Miss him.
Representative Whitson.
Mr. Speaker, request you recognize Chairman Hazelwood from Chairman Curcio's desk.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
I'd like to read now the plaque on the seat that I have the very great honor to work from this session, the seat that Charles Sargent served this state in for so long. And I can't tell you how many times I just wish that I could reach out to Charles and ask a quick question, particularly in this part of our session. We truly do miss him. And Nancy, we again, as was said in the video, we appreciate the fact that you and your family were willing to share him with the state of Tennessee, where he made a huge impact. The plaque reads, veteran businessman, public servant, the Honorable Charles M. Sargent Jr. of Franklin, Tennessee, Williamson County, served this House with honor and distinction as a representative of District 61 from the 100th through the 110th General Assemblies. As able chairman of Finance, Ways and Means Committee, Representative Sargent's many contributions to Tennessee and his fellow Tennesseans shall be everlasting. That says so well what we are here to honor today, an everlasting impact on this state. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Whitson.
Mr. Speaker, request you join us for a photo, and anybody else in the assembly come down and join us, please. Thank you.
Welcome and honoring Representative Whitson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize someone up in the gallery, a young girl I met 51 years ago. She gave me her phone number. I still remember it, and I was a sack boy at Giant Foods over in Hundred Oaks. My wife of 47 years, Pam. Pam?
Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wanted to get my colleagues' attention. I'm going to be probably bringing a bill next session that officially changes the name of District 95 to District of Champions. About a month ago, Houston High School, which is one of the two public schools in my district, laid waste to the AAA boys basketball field and walked away with the gold ball. And then this past weekend, the other public high school, Collierville, their cheerleading squad took home the large division UCA National Cheerleading Championship. So I'd like to offer our congratulations to those hardworking young men and women in both of our public school system back in the District of Champions, District 95. Thank you.
Representative Carringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have up in the balcony here right above me, I have my first granddaughter, Emma Grace. This is her very first time to be able to come over here. And of course, my husband is to our right. And my daughter, Christy, who was here many years ago with Bill Dunn back in 2002 as his intern. John Mark Wendell said she hadn't changed any. And then my son-in-law, Grant. And I just wanted to welcome them. This is their first time to be able to come and visit us. So thank you all. I love you all.
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I want to tell you over the weekend, last week, we had some pretty tough fires in East Tennessee. And I want to give a shout out to the volunteer firemen, our regular firemen, and the Tennessee Department of Ag. It was amazing how they organized. And even though there were thousands of acres destroyed, no lives were lost and no houses were lost. That's how hard they fought that this last week. And just want to give them a shout out. And if you see a volunteer firefighter or a firefighter or somebody in the Department of Ag, make sure you give them some love for all the work they do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Gant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to brag on my son. He ran the 1,600 meters in track Saturday, and with a time of 4.59, and that actually moves him to the number 5 spot across the state. So give him applause for that accomplishment. I'm proud of him.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's a special day for one of our members, and actually one of the members who had this plaque installed for Chairman Sargent. So happy birthday to Representative Susan Lynn.
Chairman Stupicki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday, I had the honor and privilege to go to Whitthorne Middle School and talk to some 8th graders there about education. And it was very enlightening and very pleasing to know that they are engaged as students in their education. Also, I had a chance to go to Santa Fe Unit School and work with some special ed teachers up there. And I want to give a big happy birthday to Carter Dowden, Juan Manuel Alvarez, and then Kaylin Hendricks was on this call with us too, bright young lady. Members, don't forget, next week is Teacher Appreciation Week, and I want to make sure that we recognize the hard work that our teachers have done this year in these most trying times. Mr. Speaker, if everybody could just rise and give them a round of applause to show our appreciation for our teachers, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, as many of you all may have heard, one of our colleagues, Senator Thelma Harper, died this past Thursday. And I would like members please stand that we may have just a brief moment of silence. I remember she was the first Black female state senator in Tennessee, impacted all of our lives. And if you ever had a chance to have a conversation with her, you knew that her concern was about our young people and about our seniors. And so the plans are still being made for the family. But if we could just pause for a moment in prayer for Senator Thelma Harper. Amen.
Any further recognition? Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I lost my 19-year-old cousin to gun violence in Dallas. His name was Cameron Collier. He was a Marine. He earned the right to be called a Marine. He was an amateur boxer. He was ambitious and driven by young entrepreneurship. And I just want my first cousin, Tisha Collier, and her other children, Aaron, Nia, and Norman, to know that we are thinking about them in the state of Tennessee, sending our condolences and heartfelt prayers all the way to the state of Texas for the loss of her son, the loss of her child. And no parent should ever have to bury their child, ever. And so if we can have a moment of silence, silent prayer for my first cousin, Tisha Collier, and the family, I'd appreciate it. Amen. Thank you.
Any further recognition? Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction to resolutions.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that all resolutions properly filed be introduced pursuant to Rule number 17 in place of the consent calendar or refer to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate Joint Resolutions congratulatory and memorializing.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that all Senate joint resolutions congratulatory and memorialized in line with the desk be placed on the consent calendar pursuant to Rule number 17.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Resolutions lying over.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that all resolutions lying over be referred to the appropriate standing committee.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Senate bills on first consideration.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Senate bills 46, 280, 561, 588, and 1047 transmitted by the Senate be held on the desk pending third consideration of their companion House bills.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Senate bills on second consideration, House bills on second consideration, petitions, memorials, reports from standing committees, reports from select committees, calendars. Mr. Speaker, the House has a consent calendar.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of the consent calendar on third and final consideration in keeping with Rule 50.
Gentleman moves passage of the consent calendar, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, any objections been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no objections filed.
Anyone seeking recognition on the consent calendar? We're voting on the consent calendar. All members in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 94, no nays.
Having received the constitutional majority, I declare the consent calendar passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House has a regular calendar.
Call up the first bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1305 by Chairman White and others relative to open enrollment. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk. Mr. Speaker, this bill was previously considered and reset for today's regular calendar.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 788.
Chairman White moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 788 without objection. So ordered. Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 788 on third and final consideration.
Chairman White moves passage of Senate Bill 788 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Amendment 1 by Chairman White. Mr. Speaker, it was timely filed.
Representative White, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this amendment does, we are pushing the effective date of this bill out to the 2022-2023 school year. instead of this year, and I'll explain in the bill exactly why we're doing that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative White moves adoption of amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman White, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this piece of legislation before you deals with open enrollment within a school district or LEA. Current law requires that LEAs have an open enrollment period during which parents or guardians may choose from a list of schools within the LEA that have spaces available. This bill just adds transparency to the system by stating that the open enrollment period should be a period of 30-day window with a 14-day notification window before that, so the parents will have plenty of time to know what's going on. And I will add that most of the LEAs already do this and do it well. This just adds clarity and transparency moving forward. The amendment to push it off to the 2022-2023 year, we have 147 school districts. Some are doing quite well. We just want to make sure that if there's any issues come up, we have time to address that in the next legislative session. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman White renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Sponsor, I'm concerned about the problems this could pose for funding reasons, for athletes being recruited. Could you talk to that?
Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, the athletes, the TSSAA rules that follow will continue to follow. There's no change in that. And this is just within the LEA, and there's lots of flexibility where this is just that there are seats available in another school to have transparency, let the parents know that, but they still can hold and reserve the flexibility as many seats as they need because of returning students or other issues that they have.
Leader Camper.
So, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So you don't see that there may be a funding issue with one school losing several students to another, to say 5 or 6 different schools, and not getting a return of other students coming into that particular school?
Chairman White.
Not really, because this is within that LEA, the school district. It's just things within the LEA. Now, there are reasons sometimes it may benefit a parent if, even though they're zoned in one area, just to be able to go to another school. And so what they do is work with the school. And what this basically does is just puts in place a transparency to let the parent know that there is a space at another school where they can apply for it.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that you're saying it's within the LEA, but there are schools that are funded based on their daily attendance. So if I have an influx of students out of my particular school to other schools, but don't get that number in return, how would that affect that particular school? I get the LEA piece, but if my school is funded based on that, that goes into the numbers of teachers, staff, and all of that.
Chairman White.
I think that could best be determined with there, getting back with the LEA, if there are spaces available in that school. Yes, you're right. The funding goes to that school, but the LEA, the district, still has the ability to control the amount of students going to each school. This just lets the parent know. This is a transparency bill, a clarity bill. It lets them know. It doesn't mean they all necessarily get there. Now, if a lot of students apply, then they have to have a lottery. But
Leader Camper.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Sponsor. I think Shelby County is doing this now. Are they not doing this right now?
Chairman White.
They are.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's what I thought. But I do have a question. It's more of a technical question. The amount of seats that the school is reserving for the return of its anticipated enrollment, is that to be published also, or just the amount of seats that may be available?
Chairman White.
The number of seats that would be available, they still have the flexibility to hold those seats and say, no, we anticipate that only this many but the seats that already maybe with the students returning would already be held out, so they don't have to report that.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Sponsor. Is there anything in this language that would make it so that schools will not abuse it and fudge their numbers in order to keep students out?
Chairman White.
Within the language of this bill, it's like say very simply, most of our districts are already doing this in some capacity. This is just really for the parents to know that if this school in another area that may fit their student, their child best, maybe for a multitude of reasons, that there is spaces available. They can apply for it. They may not necessarily get it, but this is, lets them know. It's a transparency and a clarity bill.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You didn't really answer my question, but I'm voting for the bill, though. But thank you for that. I just don't want schools to, let's say, if you have a high-performing school and you want to keep students from certain areas out, so they say, hey, we're anticipating 2,000 students, therefore we don't have any seats available, when really it may be 1,800 coming. And so that's kind of what I was asking for. I love the idea of the transparency, but we'd also want to make sure that no one abuses it and fudges the numbers.
Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would agree with you. That's why I pushed the effective date out 1 year as we get back into the new school year coming up. And if we see issues such as this, so that our schools can either adapt to that or we can correct anything.
Very good. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker Sexton. To the sponsor, how will your bill impact charter schools, whether they're in the ASD or not?
Chairman White.
How will this bill affect charter schools? Really, this is for our LEAs within our district, so I really don't see it affecting that any at all.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. So the charters would not be required to provide information or to make publication under your bill?
Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I understand it, that would be a separate issue. This is for open enrollment within the LEA schools within that district.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, sponsor.
Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairman, I'm back here. I'm actually excited. Next year, one of my children is going to be attending a magnet school here, public magnet school here in Nashville. But my question is, I know when students apply for these different schools and there might be opening, there's a couple different pools where they pull, and see and tell you that your child may or may have not been selected for that school, and you see where they're ranked at on that waiting list. And then the parents then have that choice to either accept that seat or pass and stay in their currently zoned school. My only question is, with the timing on this, will this in any way impact by making that time frame seems a little bit more extended than the norm? Do you know if this in any way will impact that process for the pulling of those students and then letting them accept or deny if a slot is available?
Chairman White.
No, sir, do not believe so. The reason we put it out, really a lot of the open enrollment is already going on right now for next year. And so it would be tough to pass it for this year anyway. But no, the question is I do not believe so.
Representative Powell.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I know a lot of our schools have a pretty good process in place. I think Davidson County does a good job of this, making sure that we let people know. And I think what you're trying to do is just make sure that some of the districts, there's maybe not as much transparency, that transparency is provided. So I just want to make sure we weren't impacting any school district that might be doing this already, because I think it's important for those parents to have plenty of time, because obviously transportation and other arrangements need to be made. So with that, I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and you're absolutely right. And that is one reason I pushed it out a year, to make sure we didn't do anything that would affect those who are doing it right. Thank you.
Representative Haston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Call for previous question.
Previous question has been called. Any objection? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 788 as amended vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member cast their vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Crawford, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, 5 nays.
Senate Bill 788, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1351 by Chairman Vaughn and others relative to higher education.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1351 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Vaughn moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman White, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This rewrites the bill, so I defer to the sponsor for explanation. Move to adopt.
Chairman White moves adoption of amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we all love collegiate athletics, or rare is the person who doesn't. We take a lot of pride in it here in our state. And for decades, the sports model and the amateur model that the NCAA has used has seemed adequate. But somewhere along the way, the millions of dollars turned into billions of dollars. And as we started seeing revenues generated from these sports and these activities, frankly, we began to wonder, the young men and women who make up the players and the participants in these sports, are they indeed getting a fair share? Turns out that the courts have adjudicated the matter. We're not allowed to go to a pay-for-performance model, but however, athletes do own their own name, image, and likeness. They're allowed to profit from their performance with regards to the building of their image, the building of their name. It's capitalism at its finest. So what we have proposed to do is to set up guidelines like 13 other states have across the country, by which our institutions can regulate and manage third-party compensation for our student athletes with regards to name, image, and likeness. And after that explanation, Mr. Speaker, I'll stand for any questions, but I happily renew my motion.
Chairman Vaughn renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairman, thank you for this work on your bill. This is long overdue. It's supported by Knoxville, the University of Tennessee, and colleges around the state. Puts us on an even playing field. And again, long overdue. Thank you for your work on this bill.
Representative Sapicki.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just got to let everybody know I have a conflict on this. I'll be voting or blue lighting it.
Any further discussion? Any objection to previous question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1351 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Kumar, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 87, 2 nays, 6 present, not voting.
House Bill 1351, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 955 by Chair Lady Littleton and others relative to juvenile offenders. Mr. Speaker, Senate bills on the desk.
Chair Lady Littleton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 0281.
Chair Lady Littleton moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 281, properly seconded without objection. So ordered. Chair Lady Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 0281 on third and final consideration.
Chair Lady Littleton moves passage of Senate Bill 281 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call the first amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1, Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Kershaw, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Senate bill move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chair Lady Littleton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill states, should a juvenile adjudicated delinquent commit conduct that, if committed by an adult, would constitute an offense of aggravated rape, rape of a child, or aggravated rape of a child, the court shall instruct the child that he or she must not accept employment or volunteer in any capacity that the child knows or reasonably should know will cause the child to be in close and frequent contact with a minor. This excludes incidental contact, and the order will remain in effect until the child reaches age 18. With that, I renew my motion.
Chair Lady Littleton renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 281, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays.
Senate Bill 281, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed. I objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up the next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1268 by Chair Lady Littleton relative to the Department of Children's Services.
Chair Lady Littleton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1268 on third and final consideration.
Chair Lady Littleton moves passage, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up first amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Vice Chairman Jernigan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt.
Vice Chairman Jernigan moves adoption of amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chair Lady Littleton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This says that the Department of Children's Services shall notify the appropriate court when the department has knowledge that a foster parent from a kinship placement violated a court order by allowing a child to visit the child's parent within 30 days of the department's knowledge of the information. Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chair Lady Littleton renews her motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1268 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Camper, aye. Lamar, aye. Reagan, aye. Sapicki, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays, one present not voting.
House Bill 1268, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1200 by Chairman Hawk relative to data reported administrative office of the courts. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Hawk, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 829.
Chairman Hawk moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 829, probably seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 829 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Hawk moves passage of Senate Bill 829 on third and final consideration, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up first amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment Number 1, Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Vice Chairman Jernigan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's the same as Senate Amendment 1. Move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Hawk, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 829 is a bill related to our Tennessee court information systems, the TENSYS system that we have. In order to assist the conversion about justice or the conversation about justice reform, we must have a workable system of data sharing. What this bill will do is require the AOC, the Administrative Office of Courts, to provide each county clerk in a county that has not installed the TENSYS system with a list of data that is required to be integrated. This will put us all on the same page as we look toward criminal justice reform. With that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Hawk renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 829, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 91, no nays.
Senate Bill 829 having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1072 by Chairman Curcio and others relative to actions against the state.
Chairman Curcio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1072 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Curcio moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call the First Amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Jernigan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt Amendment 1.
Vice Chairman Jernigan moves adoption of Amendment number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of Amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Curcio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Curcio renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Chairman Curcio.
Yes,
he
sir.
does. Representative Beck.
Explain to me exactly where you're heading in this, or where this bill heads. Did you adopt them? Is it amended?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to my good friend from Davidson County. Yes, House Bill 1072 as amended seeks to ensure that laws passed by the General Assembly remain in effect until a final determination as to their constitutionality has been made. The laws we pass are presumed to be constitutional unless a court finds otherwise. Unfortunately, recent history has shown that such rulings have often been overturned by the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court. Just because one judge in one part of the state believes our laws to be unconstitutional does not mean that a judicial panel representing one of our grand divisions or a court representing the entire state will agree. With that track record in mind, I would argue that it is prudent to stay any injunction from a trial court concerning the constitutionality of state law until we see the outcome of the final appeal. There is no need to unnecessarily block our laws from going into effect if they are eventually going to be confirmed as constitutional.
Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, for example, this body passed vouchers that was held to be unconstitutional. But under your bill, we would go ahead and implement the vouchers until the court of highest jurisdiction, probably the Supreme Court, rules on the constitutionality. So explain to me exactly how we've gotten to a point where we as a body, when we have three separate branches of government, we're going to overrule the judicial branch and say, hey guys, y'all have gotten it wrong a couple of times. So we're going to say that if you rule against us in a lower court, that automatically the ruling is ineffective until a final court rules on that. Is that what you're doing in this bill?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wouldn't characterize it as us telling them what they can or can't do, but it just simply provides continuity. So until that final authority rules, again, the actions that we do on this House floor are presumed to be constitutional until the final authority says that they are or they are not. So if they are challenged, then it's that final appeal, that whether it be the appellate court or all the way to the Supremes, once they make their decision, then if they rule that the action is unconstitutional, then so be it. But folks have got to have continuity as they move forward. You mentioned one law in particular, but there are other examples. So this would simply say that the General Assembly's actions are presumed to be constitutional until the court of final authority says they're not.
Representative Beck.
So no matter how drastically unconstitutional a law that comes out of the legislative branch is, we're telling the judicial branch, no, we're going to let this go forward no matter how radical until the ultimate court decides its constitutionality. Is that what you're saying?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would simply just stay the injunction. So obviously that chancellor or that court's voice has been heard, and that's going to be considered at the appellate level, the Supreme level. It would just stay that injunction.
Representative Beck.
You know, the point of an injunction is to keep an injustice from happening, is to stop bad things from happening to our citizenry. And in my estimation, by you not allowing a judicial injunction to happen, you're allowing or opening the door for bad things to happen to the citizenry of the great state of Tennessee. And for that reason, I will have to oppose your bill. Thank you.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we went over this a little bit in the committee process. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. I don't want to retread on any of the great points made by my colleague from Davidson County and fellow member of the bar, but anybody who's ever stepped foot or stood on their on two hind legs in a courtroom know how little sense this bill makes. Such little sense that we would pass a bill such as this to defeat the very purpose for injunctive relief at the trial court level. In fact, there's already two tools in place to accomplish what's trying to be done here in a manner that actually makes sense. One of them is the Rule 9 rule of appellate procedure in the state of Tennessee, and one of them is Tennessee Rule of Appellate Procedure, Rule 10. And Rule 10, I think, gets more to what this bill is aiming at, since it's purely reactionary to recent court rulings. And in that one, it says if the lower court has so far departed from the accepted and usual course of judicial proceedings as to require immediate review, a party may seek immediate review of an interlocutory order. So what we have here, there's a tool in place, a proper procedure in place, Rule 10. And the point is worth making, because it was established in the committee process that this bill is reactionary to recent court rulings. It's interesting to note that the state of Tennessee and the Attorney General's office last year, in the rulings that were made that are so unpopular in this body, the state of Tennessee and the Attorney General did not seek Rule 10 review of the interlocutory orders or injunctive relief set forth by the trial court. Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you and emphasize this bill makes such little sense. There's procedures in place under the Appellate Rules of Civil Procedure. Please vote against this legislation. We cannot continue to seek to remake the judiciary and the court system simply because we disagree with one or two decisions. The system works. Let it work. Thank you.
Representative Lafferty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not in the courts like some of these other gentlemen, my other colleagues. I am curious, when we start up a program, no matter the nature of it, court cases can take months, sometimes years to play out. I'm concerned about the allocation of resources on behalf of the state to start implementation of some law that we may pass, and then only find out months or even years later it's unconstitutional, and yet we've already taken off. Could you address that for me?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would argue that we have that danger now. We begin to implement a process, a chancellor or a lower court rules it unconstitutional. We start, we stop, we start again once it goes to the appeals of the Supremes, and they say, no, in fact, it is constitutional. So again, the spirit of this is that the laws that we pass are presumed to be constitutional, and that's exactly what we're sticking with here, to make sure that the will of this body is implemented in the way that we see fit. Now, again, if that court of final jurisdiction says, no, in fact, it's not constitutional, then the game's over. But I would argue that we've got the risk that you're describing now.
Representative Lafferty.
So then I guess the potential does exist that if we do have a court case that drags out over an elongated period, then we could indeed be engaging the gears of government, the taxpayers' funds, to start to implement whatever it is, only to find out later that it's not going to be upheld. Is that correct?
Chairman Curcio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, what this bill would do is we pass a law and a lower court says that they rule it to be unconstitutional. It's going to stay that injunction until the court of final jurisdiction rules whether or not it's constitutional.
Representative Lafferty.
I'm not sure I got the clarity I was looking for, but thank you.
Representative Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Sponsor, I'm trying to figure out where did this bill derive from? What ruling could have been maybe the voucher ruling or maybe the absentee voting ruling? I'm just trying to figure out what are we trying to usurp the judicial system? And more or less, this is just court packing. So I'm just trying to figure out which one of those decisions did the powers that be didn't like.
Chairman Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is not targeted at any one specific court case. It simply underscores the notion that the laws that we pass in this General Assembly are considered to be constitutional until the court of final authority decides that they're not.
Representative Mitchell.
Well, again, as many of my colleagues have stated over and over, I think we're ruining a system that has been around for 200 and something years that has seemed to work pretty well. And there's some pretty intelligent people in this room, I give you that. But when you start dealing with the three branches of government and us trying to take the power of the judicial system because you don't like what they've decided, you're ruining the democracy as we know it. And, it's the things you don't like today. Well, in a few years, this legislature may change and shift and balance, and you don't want that to happen. So think about what you do sometimes, because destroying something that's worked for a couple of hundred years just because of a couple of court cases that didn't go your way is pretty short-sightedness.
Chairman Kershaw. Nothing. All right. Representative Griffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to my good friends from Davidson County and some of the other locations. This body literally approves the Supreme Court rules that they submit to us every year for changes. So the sky's not falling. This will establish a procedure whereby it's a presumption that a law that we passed is constitutional until it works up to the highest court at that level, and whether it's overturned or not. That procedure is still in place, is my understanding. There's always emergency petition to go up to the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court could take those up or decide not to take those up. This is smart, sensible legislation. It simply says there should be a presumption in the law that when we pass a statute, it is constitutional and it should be treated as such by the lower courts. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank the sponsor for this smart legislation. Thank you.
Representative Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question been called. Any objection? I've got objection. All right. We're on the board for previous question. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Todd, aye. Hazelwood, aye. Sapicki, aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 64, 28 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting on House Bill 1072 as amended. All in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote?
No.
Ms. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 64, 26 nay, 3 present not voting.
House Bill 1072 having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1062 by Chairman Hawk and others relative to the death penalty.
Chairman Hawk, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1062 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Hawk moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Curcio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Roll to the Hill.
Without objection, Amendment Number 1 rolled to the Hill. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Amendment 2 by Chairman Halsey. Mr. Speaker, it was timely filed.
Chairman Halsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been told that this bill will only affect 1 or 2 people that are currently on death row. If that's the case, I move to withdraw.
Without objection, withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the body back to House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Curcio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt.
Chairman Curcio moves adoption of Amendment Number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of Amendment Number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Hawk, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have been working for several years to better define the term intellectual disabilities in the Tennessee Code. House Bill 1062 creates clarity in the definition of intellectual disability throughout code, and more specifically in the Tennessee Criminal Code as related to capital punishment. In addition, it remains reflective of the constitutional provisions and follows court guidance on this subject matter. In updating and refining the language of intellectual disability, our Tennessee Attorney General and our District Attorneys Conference have asked that we clarify the refinement of this language, and that the language you've seen in Section 2 of the amendment would not, let me say that again, would not create a second or subsequent appeal hearing on the issue of intellectual disability to someone who has been given the sentence of capital punishment. The U.S. Supreme Court and the Tennessee Supreme Court have both opined that we cannot put to death someone who is deemed to be intellectual disabled. So regardless of whether this bill passes or not, we still cannot put someone to death if they have an option and have not utilized that option to talk about an intellectual disability during their trial proceedings. Once again, this bill assures that we'll be able to follow constitutional provisions and follow court guidance on this subject. With that explanation, Mr. Speaker and members, I renew my motion.
Chairman Hawk renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1062 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Crawford, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 89, 4 nays, 1 present, not voted.
House Bill 1062, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 446 by Representative Warner.
Representative Warner, at your desk.
Mr. Speaker, if it'd be okay, I'd like to roll this bill to Thursday's morning's calendar, please.
Without objection, roll to Thursday's calendar. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1298 by Representative Stewart relative to consumer protection. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative Stewart, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute conform to Senate Bill 1211.
Representative Stewart moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1211 without objection. So ordered. Representative Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1211 on third and final consideration.
Representative Stewart moves passage of Senate Bill 1211 on third and final consideration. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Stewart, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill has passed the Senate with a unanimous vote. It just ensures that our anti-phishing rules, which protect people's private information, apply to text messages. The law was designed for emails, and this makes it explicit that texts are included in the protections that we've already created. With that, I move passage.
Representative Stewart renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to congratulate the
the member on this bill. I think it's rare that we see somebody who's up here to protect personal information rights. And so we're going to have another bill on the calendar today, and I really appreciate his support too. Thank you, Chairman.
Any further discussion? Representative Parkinson and Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to thank Representative Williams for those comments. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1211, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member cast their vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 95, no nays.
Senate Bill 1211, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed. I objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 159 by Chairman Williams and others relative to privacy.
Chairman Williams, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage on third and final consideration of House Bill 159.
Chairman Williams moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
Now Civil Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Jernigan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Roll to the Hill.
Without objection, roll to the Hill. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
House Government Operations Committee Amendment number 1. Mr. Speaker, it's filed as House Amendment 2.
Chairman Reagan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment makes the bill. I defer to the sponsor for further explanation. Move to adopt.
Chairman Reagan moves adoption of amendment number 2, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 2 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House is ready for further consideration of Civil Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Vice Chairman Jernigan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to withdraw Amendment 1.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Call up next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
No further amendments, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. This amendment that rewrites the bill that is before us, is the intention of this legislation to ensure that personal information like the bill before are protected for all 501c3 filers across the state. This bill only clarifies that the confidential information such as home addresses, phone numbers of individuals will be kept confidential. Many have asked me along the way if this has anything to do with campaign finance or funding, and the answer to that question is no, that any PAC still has to file their disclosures as it relates to campaign finance, and this bill does not apply to that. I give the example that this bill usually applies to a nonprofit whose contributors want to remain anonymous so that the other people won't call and ask them for money. This just protects their simple address and phone number and name. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Williams renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor, I'm glad you said what you did earlier. So this just deals with C3s. It does not have anything to do with 501c4s, correct?
Chairman Williams.
I may have misspoken, but that's not the case. This bill has to do with all 501cs. All. A through F, I think it is.
Representative Mitchell.
Well, then yes, it does have a lot to do with campaign finance. As someone who has a 501c4 has spent a couple of $100,000 on TV against in the final days of a campaign, you like to be able to search that out to figure out who those people are, which dark money was coming into this state from San Francisco and Michigan, funding a race in Nashville, Tennessee. So what you're doing is hiding those people, so we'll never be able to find out who is doing things in Tennessee that should not be. So with that being said, this has everything in the world to do with campaign finance, and that's horrible if we're trying to hide those type of actions in this state. I thought we passed an ethics bill on this floor last week.
Chairman Williams.
Thank you. I really appreciate your comments, but unfortunately it doesn't apply. All 501cs in the supposed dark money that you talked about that came aggressively after you, it doesn't apply because what you're talking about is a PAC, a political action committee. This only applies to 501cs.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is with regards to the state's access to it, because we want to do our best to prevent fraud. And it says in here that the comptroller would have access to the information for purposes of an audit. My question is, would it have to initiate an audit prior to having access to the information, or would it have access to the information for its review purposes in order to know whether an audit is required?
Chairman Williams. Chairman Williams.
It was the previous, there would have to be an audit in order to request the information.
Representative Clemens.
Okay, that raises a concern in my mind simply because of sometimes the state needs to know if there are discrepancies or if there are grounds whether or not they need to proactively initiate an audit as opposed to a random audit. So I have a concern about that particular order, and I appreciate you answering my question.
Chairman Williams, anything? No, sir. Representative Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To sponsor yield.
Chairman Williams does. Representative Stewart.
And I salute you for boxing me in when I was passing my own privacy bill. But nevertheless, we talked about this in committee. My concern is that with 501c4 entities as opposed to 3, 501c4 entities are the entities that the federal government precisely gives the right to participate in our political system, right?
Chairman Williams.
Yes.
Representative Stewart.
So wouldn't this bill essentially allow unlimited money to be secretly provided to, say, a 501c4 entity dedicated to voter registration or other direct political activity, even providing money to candidates, such that the public would have no understanding about how money was being wielded in our political contests?
Chairman Williams.
The simple answer to your question is no. Advocacy groups still have to file based upon the federal regulation. This has to do with the state filing.
Representative Stewart.
Yes, but I guess my concern is you could have an advocacy group, a C4 organization, essentially derive, say, $10 million in contributions from 10 wealthy individuals. And under our current law, we could go and look and see who those individuals were. And so we could understand, say they were coming after me in my particular, in a primary, if you will. We could look and figure out where that money was coming from. Now we're essentially lowering the curtain on that. And so you could have very moneyed political actors moving around our state, participating in the system, and nobody would know really who's behind that. And to be more specific, like I myself could create an advocacy group, the Mike Stewart Political Advocacy Group, and I know everyone in this body would trust me to use that money purely for the good of the state in a nonpartisan fashion. But the point is, I could receive, and I'm dreaming here, but $25 million from some donor, and nobody would be able to see under your bill who that was, who was funding my group. Isn't that the way this works?
Chairman Williams.
I feel like I should justify a long answer based upon your verbose question, but the answer still remains the same. Advocacy groups are still federally required to present those numbers, and under the circumstance you just gave, they would have to provide that information.
Representative Stewart.
And I guess I would, to make a more fine point, but what we're doing today is we're getting rid of our state requirement. We don't know what will happen at the federal level, where that is. We have control over our state. And what you're doing is you're lowering the curtain on these donors for the purposes of our state system. Isn't that right?
Chairman Williams.
No, that's not right. Just like your bill before, we're just keeping this information private in the same fashion that we would now. This information can still be garnered, but it would have to be in regards to a case.
Representative Stewart.
I think the effect of what you're doing, and I think we're having a discussion here, I think we're just interpreting the effect of your bill. Here's why I don't like your bill, and I know you think it's a good bill. I don't like your bill because I think in contrast to the personal privacy of an individual, here, if you're talking about highly moneyed donors, it doesn't take a lot of money to sway the political system in a state like this or in any set of state elections. And the people should be able to know if people who are inclined to support Democrats or inclined to support Republicans have decided to step into our state and throw their weight around. Right now, if I set up an advocacy group like I described, and I start using that advocacy, I start using that advocacy group, and mailings start to appear, and things start to happen in people's districts, they can all look to my group and see where the money came from. That will no longer be true after the passage of your bill. I just don't think that improves our political process. I understand what you're saying about the federal government. We don't have control over that, but we do have control over our own system. That's why I don't support your bill.
Representative Towns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
Chairman Williams. He does. Representative Towns.
Thank you. Mr. Representative, I too a little bit concerned about the transparency of anything that we do. We've just gone through ethics training as it relates to us. Everything we do, we disclose it. All this is political. What we do is political. What these advocacy groups do, that's political as well. And in order for the public to have the kind of confidence in us and these groups, law enforcement, we must be transparent as we possibly can. But this is a scenario that troubles me even more. It's been proven that we have foreign people that are influencing the politics in this country. Not a good idea. We all would probably be in consensus on that. It's not a good idea. So if you have an organization that's a nonprofit, and then you got a foreign group from Russia or some of these other places that are donating money to these groups to influence the policies that they want, we'll never know where that money is coming from when it's given to these various organizations. So my question to you is, how would we prevent foreign money from being infused into these organizations and influence the politics in this country, in this state?
Chairman Williams.
Thank you. As I told your colleague from on the other side of the room, advocacy groups are a way that you do that. Advocacy groups still have to, are still required to do that based upon your example. As it relates to the federal requirements, that would be a question for a body other than this one.
Representative Towns.
My concern is that we're human beings, and human beings make a lot of mistakes, sometimes intentionally and on purpose. What if they don't do what they're supposed to do? And mind you, what I'm speaking of, it's money coming from other countries trying to influence our politics. We need an ironclad way of making sure that things are disclosed so we'll know where this money is coming from in our politics. I'm not talking about domestic, I'm talking about foreign money. So I would appreciate having some kind of assurance that we can make sure that we don't have foreign money coming in and influence the politics in this state or in this country. I don't think it's a good idea. So how can we make sure that we do that with this bill?
Chairman Williams.
Currently, there is no way to guarantee that at the federal or the state level. But this bill simply says, if someone, by your example, were to give money to a PAC or an advocacy group, they have to report it. If we make laws up here all the time that people choose not to obey, and if somebody wanted to send money and didn't want to obey the law, then that's on them. And this bill doesn't deal with that at all.
Towns.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Speaker, thank you. And I thank the world of you. I think that what we need to do is be very, very conscientious about this particular piece of legislation. As America, Tennessee, the various states, we're not an island unto ourselves. People will reach out and touch you from afar, as they do with identity theft, as they do with everything else that this technology will allow us to do. And don't think we're going to be insulated from somebody trying to impact our politics on foreign soil. I just don't think it's a good idea. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question has been called. Any objection to the previous question? We got a few. We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 65-24, nay, 2 present, not voting.
Previous question prevails. We are voting on House Bill 159. All those in favor, vote aye when the bell rings. As amended, those vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Aye, 66-24, nay, 4 present, not voting.
House Bill 159 having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 893 by Representative McKenzie and others relative to expunction. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Representative McKenzie, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform with Senate Bill 1028.
Representative McKenzie moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 1028 without objection. So ordered. Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 1028 on third and final consideration.
Representative McKenzie moves passage of Senate Bill 1028 on third and final consideration. Probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative McKenzie, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill simply removes the date of January 1st, 1980 for those individuals seeking petitioning the state for a pardon that were convicted of a nonviolent crime. Again, this bill simply removes that date of January 1st, 1980. I renew my motion.
Representative McKenzie renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1028, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member casts a vote, does any member wish to change their vote? Miller, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 93, no nays, 2 present, not voting.
Senate Bill 1028, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 109 by Chairman Halsey and others relative to parole. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill is on the desk.
Chairman Halsey, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 252.
Chairman Halsey moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 252, properly seconded without objection. So ordered. Chairman Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 252 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Halsey moves passage of Senate Bill 252 on third and final consideration, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Kershaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1 is similar to the Senate Amendment Number 1, but House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1 also updates the effective date to July 1, 2021. Move to adopt House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Kershaw moves adoption of House Amendment Number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of adoption of House Amendment Number 1, vote say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Halsey, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this bill, we have folks in the state penitentiary who happen to have most of the time, a federal detainer warrant, it's called, against them. And what they want to do is as soon as Tennessee's through with them, they want to come pick them up and put them in a federal penitentiary. This bill says that if you're one of those people and you have reached your red date and you're eligible for parole, and the time you're going to serve in the federal penitentiary is more than the time you've got left to serve in a state penitentiary, the parole board can go ahead and consider turning you over to to the federal penitentiary, and taxpayers in Tennessee won't have to pay for you anymore. So with that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Halsey renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 252 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 91, 2 nays, 1 present, unvoted.
Senate Bill 252 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 870 by Chairman Doggett and others relative to victim compensation.
Chairman Doggett, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 870 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Doggett moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Criminal Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Kershaw, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment makes the bill. Move to adopt.
Chairman Kershaw moves adoption of Amendment Number 1, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of Amendment Number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Doggett, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, what this bill does is we are reprioritizing in code where restitution comes in. Currently under code right now, there's 4 things that court costs, fees, fines, litigation taxes, and so forth that are paid, but nothing in there for restitution. We're making the process better for victims because now there is an avenue for them to be able to seek and gain restitution by being prioritized first above those court costs, fines, and fees that are currently in code. It also adds in there a provision that the judge may take into consideration the financial resources and future ability of a defendant to pay, and also changes from 1 to 2 years the number of years in which a victim of a crime may file claim for restitution. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Chairman Doggett renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 870 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Lamberth, aye. Williams, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 94, no nays.
House Bill 870 having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1254 by Sexton of Granger relative to forfeiture.
Representative Sexton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1254 on third and final consideration.
Representative Sexton moves passage, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call it First Amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment Number 1.
Vice Chairman Jernigan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move to adopt Amendment 1.
Vice Chairman Jernigan moves adoption of Amendment Number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of Amendment Number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Sexton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this bill does is it raises the amount that an attorney can charge in a civil asset forfeiture case. Under the present terms of the civil asset forfeiture, if the average is $2,500 in cash, the most that any attorney could make is $550. Now, that means that most people that just has a small amount, like $2,500, maybe not a small amount to them, but they can't get an attorney to go after their money if they feel like that it's been taken wrongfully. So what this does is it does away with that 25% of whatever the amount that was seized, and it raises the limit from $3,000 to $10,000. And the company or the seizing agent that takes the property is the ones that would have to pay the bill if they weren't found guilty of any crime. So this is a good bill. I appreciate your vote on it and be glad to answer any questions.
Representative Sexton renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Towns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
Representative
Yes.
Sexton, Representative Towns.
Sir, I am fantastically excited about you bringing this legislation. I appreciate you continuing the mark of one of our former reps that left on this forfeiture because it's out of control. It's really out of control. And I'd like to commend you once again, and if you allow me to, I'd like to sign on to that bill. It's a good bill for the citizens.
Representative Sexton.
I do appreciate that. It is out of control, and I thank you for your support.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I hope the fact that we're thanking you for bringing this bill doesn't kill the bill. Honestly, members, Reverend Sexton, we need reform in civil asset forfeiture. We all speak to innocence before you're innocent until proven guilty, in the House, but we have to act like it too. The fact that government can come and take your items. Items was a replacement word. The fact that government can come and take your items before you are found guilty and you have little to no recourse, or it's an uphill battle, or it's costly, is honestly unacceptable. That's big government. To all of my libertarian friends, or those that act like they're libertarian when it's convenient, that's big government. That's government being in your way, in your business, in your pocket. I truly appreciate you and every other member. I won't call, well, I will, and Representative Lafferty, every other member that's bringing civil asset forfeiture legislation. We have to keep knocking on this door until it's fair to the citizens of the state of Tennessee. To the good Reverend, thank you. And I think I'm signed on, but I'll sign on again if I can. Thank you so much.
Representative Sexton.
I truly do appreciate everything that you said, because it is true. It is out of control. I appreciate your support. And when we find something like this, it's out of control, I'm glad that we can cross the aisle. And so I covet your signature, your co-sponsorship, and your support on this bill. Thank you.
Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, and Mr. Speaker, forgive me, I'm out of order, but we have a former member, and I wanted y'all to look over here to the balcony up in the left right-hand side. We've got Andy Holt, Representative Andy Holt. Y'all make him feel welcome. It's been a while since he's been in here.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1254 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays, 2 present, unvoted.
House Bill 1254 having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1624 by Sexton of Granger, relative to levy a privilege tax on occupancy of accommodations furnished to transients in Granger County.
Representative Sexton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1624 on third and final consideration.
Representative Sexton moves passage, properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, any amendments been filed?
Mr. Speaker, no amendments filed.
Representative Sexton, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is just a private act for my county, Granger County, hotel motel tax, 5%, and I renew my motion.
Representative Sexton renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I just wanted to get this straight with a sponsor yield.
Representative Sexton. Representative Beck.
I just wanted to get this straight, sponsor. Is this a tax bill?
Representative Sexton.
You know, it's been a long time. You and I came in 7 years ago together, and I see the light.
Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor.
Representative Sparks.
Will the sponsor yield?
Representative Sexton.
Don't know, I guess.
I was just going to ask, how many hotels does Bean Station have? You have three?
Got one motel, it's got 3 rooms, and you have to park across the street.
Representative
Now,
Sparks.
I rent out 2 rooms of my own, so.
Representative Sparks.
How many McDonald's does your district have?
I own the bill. Representative Sexton.
Are you counting the drive-through? Because we've got a McDonald's, but it's not a drive-through, and it doesn't have the arches. But we're hoping to get arches for long. I hope my people back home aren't hearing this.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1624 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does every member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
6711A, 7 present, not voted.
House Bill 1624, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed. I object to the motion. Reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1131 by Chairman Farmer, relative to education.
Chairman Farmer, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1131 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Farmer moves passage. Properly seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Education Administration Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman White, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for explanation.
Chairman White moves adoption of amendment number 1. Properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, what this bill does is a few years ago, we required LEAs to have background checks. And once those started occurring, the LEAs had the discretion to hire certain people if they've been charged with certain crimes, like low-level misdemeanors that has nothing to do with kids, right? No felonies. And what we left out, though, was the vendors of the LEAs. So what this does, it would give the LEA the discretion to still continue to hire a vendor or a vendor's employees if they meet 3 criteria. One is that they have a conviction that is at least 10 years old. Number 2, that conviction is a misdemeanor conviction. And number 3, that conviction has absolutely nothing to do with children. So this just gives LEAs the discretion to continue to hire those vendors and those vendors' employees to continue working in the LEA. So I'd be happy to take any questions, and I renew my motion.
Chairman Farmer renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just had a clarification question. Thankfully, the speaker didn't put me back in education this time. But in this bill, does it apply to like a general contractor might be doing an expansion on a project or no? Do you know?
Chairman Farmer.
Mr. Speaker, this bill is amended. It extends the LEA's discretion when it comes to vendors and vendor employees. So I don't know the answer to that question.
Chairman Williams.
I think it does based upon, I had a bill similar to this before. I think it does. I mainly wanted to go on the record that I hoped that your bill does based upon vendors, because contractors are vendors. The reason why I like this bill is because there are many people earlier in their lives, they made a small mistake as it relates to misdemeanor. This gives these people an opportunity to get a job so that their employer doesn't have to say, well, you can go work here, but you can't go work there. And these offenses, as you said, have nothing to do with children. They're misdemeanor offenses. I think it's really important that we allow people to get back to work. I really appreciate for this bill.
Chairman Farmer.
And thank you, Representative Williams, for that. And it's not the intent of this bill to exclude those types of companies as well. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1131 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has everybody voted? Any members changed their vote? Farmer, aye. Kumar, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays.
House Bill 1131, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1481 by Chairman Farmer and others relative to wine.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 1481 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Farmer moves passage, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Kiesling, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment does rewrite the bill. We'll defer to the sponsor for further explanation. We move to adopt.
Chairman Kiesling moves adoption. Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, what this bill does, this is geared towards our smaller wineries. This is going to help them grow. So what this bill says is that any winery that produces 270,000 liters of wine per year or less is going to be considered a small winery in this bill sense. And it's going to allow these folks to ship not 3 cases a year, but 6. And with that explanation, I renew my motion.
Chairman Farmer renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 1481 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Calfee, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 82, 4 nays, 4 present, not voted.
House Bill 1481 and received the constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 668 by Representative Freeman relative to alcohol. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill's on the desk.
Representative Freeman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of, I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 0332.
Representative Freeman moves to substitute and form to Senate Bill 332, probably second without objection. So ordered. Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of Senate Bill 0332 on third and final consideration.
Representative Freeman moves passage of Senate Bill 332 on third and final consideration, probably second. Mr. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House State Government Committee Amendment Number 1. Mr. Speaker, it's the same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Kiesling, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment is the same as the Senate amendment. We move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Freeman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill reduces the administrative and paperwork burdens on manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers when consumer tastings are conducted at retail package stores. Currently, the only way for a product to be available at a retailer is for the wholesaler to deliver the product directly with a $0 invoice. When the manufacturer wishes to be present at such consumer tasting, they have to wait until the wholesaler delivers it. This can add time, travel. Sometimes they don't show up. What this does is allows the manufacturer that can coordinate directly with the wholesaler to pick it up and deliver it with the same $0 invoice. Notice requirements are still in place to ensure the wholesaler is kept aware. And with that, I renew my motion.
Representative Freeman renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 332, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 82, 8 nays, 2 present, not voted.
Senate Bill 332, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Joint Resolution 72 by Representative Todd and others, a resolution to propose an amendment to Article 11 of the Constitution of Tennessee relative to the right to work. Mr. Speaker, the Senate Joint Resolutions on the desk.
Chairman Todd, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute SJR 2 for HJR 72.
Chairman Todd moves to substitute Senate Joint Resolution 2 for House Joint Resolution 72. Chairman Todd, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request the clerk read SJR 2 for its first reading.
Mr. Clerk, please read the resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 2 by Senator Kelsey, a resolution to propose an amendment to Article 11 of the Constitution of Tennessee relative to the right to work. Whereas Senate Joint Resolution number 648 of the 111th General Assembly, known as the, quote, right to work amendment, end quote, which proposed amendment of Article 11 of the Constitution of Tennessee relative to the right to work, was considered and agreed upon by a majority of all members elected to each of the two houses as shown by the yeas and nays entered on their journals. And whereas such resolution proposing such amendment was published in accordance with Article 11, Section 3 of the Constitution of Tennessee, and whereas protecting the right of Tennesseans to join or refuse to join a labor union or employee organization is a fundamental civil right, and whereas this right to work has played a crucial role in Tennessee's thriving economy, now therefore be it resolved by the Senate of the 112th General Assembly of the state of Tennessee, the House of Representatives concurring, that a 2/3 majority of all the members of each house concurring, as shown by the yeas and nays entered on their journals, that it is proposed that Article 11 of the Constitution of Tennessee be amended by adding the following language as a new section. It is unlawful for any person, corporation, association, or this state or its political subdivisions to deny or attempt to deny employment to any person by reason of the person's membership in, affiliation with, resignation from, or refusal to join or affiliate with any labor union or employee organization. Be it further resolved that in accordance with Article 11, Section 3 of the Constitution of Tennessee, the foregoing proposed amendment shall be submitted to the people at the next general election in which a governor is to be chosen. The same being the 2022 November general election, and the Secretary of State is directed to place such proposed amendment on the ballot for that election. Be it further resolved that the clerk of the Senate is directed to deliver copies of this resolution to the Secretary of State with this final resolving clause being deleted from such copies.
Chairman Todd, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I move that SJR 2 be set for its second reading on April 27, 2021.
Without objection, so ordered. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 155 by Chairman Haston, relative to joint economic and economic community development boards. Mr. Speaker, the Senate bill's on the desk.
Chairman Haston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 224.
Chairman Haston moves to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 224. Probably second. Without objection, so ordered. Chairman Haston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion. No, I'm sorry. I'll explain. Sorry. What this bill does is it encourages joint economic and community development boards to include school system representation. It also allows JECDBs to form collaborative partnerships that should further economic growth. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Can you add on third and final consideration, please?
On third and final consideration.
Chairman Haston moves passage of Senate Bill 224 on third and final consideration. Probably second. Mr. Clerk, call up first amendment.
House Local Government Committee Amendment Number 1, Mr. Speaker, same as Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Crawford, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to withdraw.
Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
No further amendments, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Haston, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Chairman Haston renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Bill 224 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member cast their vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 93, no nays.
Senate Bill 224, having received the Constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 771 by Chairman Haston and others relative to apprenticeships.
Chairman Haston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 771 on third and final consideration.
Chairman Haston moves passage, probably second. And Mr. Clerk, call up first amendment.
House Commerce Committee Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment rewrites the bill, so we're going to defer to the sponsor for explanation, but in the meantime, we are going to diligently and purposefully move to adopt.
Chairman Vaughn purposely moves to adopt amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Your ayes have it. You adopt it. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman Haston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this bill does is seek to improve the registered apprenticeship system in Tennessee by establishing a state apprenticeship agency. If we pass this, Tennessee would be the 27th state to do so. Establishing a state apprenticeship agency will streamline the apprenticeship application process and should increase completion rates for our students. And with that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Haston renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 771 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change your vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays.
House Bill 771 and receive the constitutional majority. I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 74 by Chairman White and others relative to the Achievement School District.
Chairman White, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 74 on third and final consideration.
Chairman White moves passage, probably seconded. Mr. Clerk, call up the First Amendment.
House Education and Instruction Committee Amendment number 1.
Chair Lady Moody, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I defer to the sponsor for explanation. Move to adopt.
Chair Lady Moody moves to adopt amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill is before us. Last year, we appointed a task force to look into the transitioning of our Achievement School District schools back into the LEAs. And basically, House Bill 74 legislation addresses exclusively the transitioning of schools currently in the ASD program. Federal law does require each state to have an intervention plan in place to address schools in the bottom 5% or priority status. Tennessee enacted into law in 2010 the ASD schools to serve as Tennessee's most intensive intervention for priority schools. The creation of the Achievement School District spurred an unprecedented focus on the lowest performing schools, both at the state and district level, with multiple districts implementing high-quality district-led intervention. The ASD schools currently serve approximately 9,000 students in 27 schools. 25 of those are in Memphis and 2 are in Metro Nashville. The original legislation, however, did not address the exit status for these charter schools and the ASDs when they approached their 10-year contract. And so what we're doing this legislation, based upon what the task force recommended, is that we are now creating a transition as they approach. Currently, they're in approximately year 8, and so we got about 2 more years. So we want to have a transition plan. And so what it does, this legislation provides 3 pathways for the exit of the ASDs as they approach their 10-year contract. If an ASD school has shown adequate performance and improvement, they may return to their LEA of origin, and they may request a new charter amendment agreement moving forward, or they may remain in the LEA. They also may remain in the Achievement School District if 60% of the parents like the school and is performing well in the neighborhood, and they petition to keep the school currently as is operated in the ASD. And then thirdly, they may apply directly if they're a high performing, which means if they have been 2 cycles performing out of priority status for 2 3-year cycles or 6 years, that they may apply to the charter school commission that we created last year. This legislation also provides the ASD schools short-term facility security by requiring that the LEA allow the charter to either purchase the building that they are in at fair market value or lease the facility for at least 3 years. And then lastly, this legislation provides that the school remain under the ASD for the remainder of the charter agreement. If the school meets the criteria for exiting priority status, then the school may apply to the LEA of origin or to the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission for a new charter agreement. And with that, Mr. Speaker, and barring any questions, I renew my motion.
Chairman White renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Sponsor, we spoke about this. I got a couple of questions. If I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are some schools that are eligible to come off right now. I think there's 2 or 3, if I'm correct.
Chairman White.
Yes, sir, you're correct.
Representative Parkinson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, because I thought I heard you say that there were none that were ready at this moment. And so there are some schools that are eligible. And I just find that, and I talked to you about this, so this is no ambush. I just thought that these students are coming from these LEAs. It seemed like the LEA should have got the first right to get their students back. But that's really not the case. As a matter of fact, what we've done is we've created more government, bigger government. And so now, we have not just one state-run school district, but we got multiple state-run school districts. The dismal Achievement School District that failed. Hey, y'all, state was in the business of education and it failed miserably. So now we're taking those schools and those students that the state failed, and we're going to move them or give them the ability to move to another state-run school district. Well, we did horrible running schools on the front end. And that's the truth. That's the truth. Y'all, we might not like my choice of words. They may be a little strong, but it fits. The state-run Achievement School District did not perform well at all. Now we're saying these schools that are eligible to come out of the state-run school district can now apply to go to the other state-run school district. Or even worse, you can get 60% of the parents to make some noise, basically, and keep their children in the failed state-run school district. This is the options that we're giving them. I got a question though, Mr. Chair, and you may be able to answer this. If 60% of the parents say we want to keep our school in the failed state-run school district, the ASD, even if the school is underperforming, will that request be granted under this legislation?
Chairman White.
If the majority of the parents are satisfied with the school and they see that their children are improving, yes, the parents have the right to do a petition. 60% they can remain in the ASD as they're continually sort of going back into the local education association.
Representative Parkinson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, for your indulgence. And so, members, y'all need to hear this so everybody's clear on this. So, in essence, we can keep a failing school in operation under this bill. So if the parents got children that are in a failing state-run school, 60% of them say, hey, we want to keep our school in the state-run school district, even though it's underperforming, it has not achieved the goal, then we're going to keep this school, this failing school, in the same failing posture, even though it was eligible to come out. But because we're giving the parents the option, and I'm cool with parent options, but I'm not cool with continuing to keep a school that has not performed in operation. We don't even, as a state, we put rules in place, so we don't even want to do that with the LEAs. But now here, we under this legislation, we are giving creating an opportunity, because sometimes the parents, they're not aware of, what's going on. And sometimes, not all the time, but because they're comfortable with what school or what charter school is in place, now we're going to keep it going because 60% of the parents say, hey, keep it going. That's not the business of education. That's not the business of education. If schools are underperforming in the LEAs, in your LEA, they're going to probably shutter it or they're going to put a charter in its place. But here in our own state, with our own state-run school district, we're giving them opportunities to continue on. What I do like about the bill, Mr. Chair, so I won't kill, it's not everything about it. What I do like about it is you are making those charter schools, and I have no issue with charters. My daughter went to a charter, for the record. You are making the charter schools pay fair market value for these properties. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Making them get a lease. Thank you for that. And not just taking the property and just giving it to these charters. Thank you for that. So that's good about the bill. But I think that we could do better in how we, approach moving schools out of the ASD. Last question, Mr. Chair. The direct run schools that are directly run by the Achievement School District, what's going to happen with those schools?
Chairman White.
They are currently under the ASD. They're state controlled. There's three of those, and as they approach their 10-year, if they are high performing, they will have the same options that the other schools have.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, and I appreciate that because I was unclear because I didn't see anything in the legislation that spoke to direct run schools. I see it in the legislation that speaks to charters. And I just want to ask one more time for the record, direct run schools are mentioned in this legislation?
Chairman White.
The Achievement School District will continue. By federal law, we are required to have an intervention plan in the state. That's why we have the Achievement School District.
Representative Parkinson.
And thank you, my last point. And yes, by federal law, we have to have an intervention. It didn't say it had to be the Achievement School District. Am I correct, Mr. Sponsor?
Chairman White.
It does have to be a state-led intervention system, yes.
Representative Parkinson.
But not the Achievement School District. There are many interventions that work. iZone worked. Maybe this new charter commission school district will work. But the Fed said we have to have an intervention. It didn't say you had to create bigger government for the intervention. It didn't say create a second state school district for the intervention. So again, I'm going to appeal to all my libertarians that's out there. If you're really about smaller government, this is not it. This is bigger government, more government, because we've created another state-run school district. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor. Thank you so much.
Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate your comments, 90% of which I would take issue with. I just want to say, remember that the reason the state had to take these schools over is because they were in a failing situation, and so the state took these over. These are very tough schools to turn around, as we all know. And so this bill specifically deals with how they will transition out at the 10-year mark. We're on year 8 right now. How will they transition out? We can talk about whether or not the ASD has been successful in all cases or not, but this is not what that bill is about. This is how they're going to transition out moving forward.
Chairman Dixie.
See if I remember my question. No,
I can roll you to the hill.
no, here we go. We addressed the high performing schools after the 10-year mark, but what happens to the underperforming schools after the 10-year mark? What happened to those schools?
Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If a underperforming charter in the ASD schools is not performing well, has not had 2 cycles out of the priority status, then they will either most likely lose their charter. They will go back to the LEA, and the LEA can either grant them a new charter to continue if they feel like they've got some potential, or they will dissolve.
Chairman Dixie.
So basically, after the 10 years, if they are underperforming, they go back to the LEA. But if they are high performing, they have a choice of several of the things that you have discussed.
Chairman White.
Yes, after the task force met all last summer and fall, this is the recommendations came out based upon talking to many parties, high performing charters, to give them an opportunity to continue to operate.
Chairman Dixie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous 2 speakers have asked a lot of the same things I was going to ask. I'll just ask one thing. So we have an underperforming school that's been under the ASD for 10 years. And the proposal is to continue it being under the same charter or the same directly under the ASD, or is that correct?
Chairman White.
No, the previous question addressed that if a charter in the ASD has been taken in their approach in their 10 years and they are underperformed, they have had not two cycles of exiting the priority status, then they will go back to the LEA. Now the LEA can reauthorize the charter or not. And so a low performing ASD doesn't necessarily, unless they can show proof that they are making gains based upon the amount of time they have been a charter, then they would go back in to the LEA.
Representative Thompson.
Thank you.
Representative Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Sponsor, how many schools that have ever went into the ASD have ever went back to the LEAs?
Chairman White.
Thank you. I have that information right here. Let me turn over to it. Okay, ASD schools have shown progress since the operation commenced in 2012. We passed the bill in 2010. 10 schools have moved out of the bottom 5%, with 3 of those schools earning priority exit status. A third of the ASD schools have exceeded student growth expectations. So there have been successes.
Representative Mitchell.
So 3 schools have left the ASD and those students have went back to the LEA in a charter or out of a charter?
Chairman White.
They have exited priority status, so whatever they may have been, they be back into the LEA or they are continuing. None of them have hit the 10-year mark yet, so they all have 10-year contracts.
Representative Mitchell.
I'm still trying to get clarification though. So usually there's a charter takeover when they go in the ASD. I'm just trying to figure out if any of those students are ever able to escape the charter and go back into public schools.
Chairman White.
If I understand your question correctly, if an ASD school has exit priority status, really it's just been since 2017 that we started these 3-year cycles. So no one has really gone through 2 complete cycles yet. So, but there are those who are exiting priority status. But if I understand your question correct, ask it one more time, make sure I can give you a correct answer.
Representative Mitchell.
So normally, we hand over a school to a charter company and they come in and take our public school children and they put them in this charter and we put them in the ASD. So if there's no improvement, which a majority have shown no improvement by these charter schools that we're about to, could sentence these children for the entirety of their school life in those charter. I'm just trying to figure out if they ever get a chance to get out of those charters in their zone area so the kid can go to a school with a library, a cafeteria, the sporting activities that a normal kid gets to enjoy in a school.
Chairman White.
Yes, sir. That's what this transition plan's all about. Now that we're approaching 10 years, that's what this transition. If without this legislation, there is no transition plan, and then we would have issues. But this is a transition plan to address that.
Representative Mitchell.
Thank you.
Representative Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ask for a previous question.
Representative Littleton calls for previous question. Any objection? Seeing none. All right. We are voting. All those in favor of House Bill 74 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change the vote? Grills aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
I 6228 nay, one present not voting.
House Bill 74 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Senate Joint Resolution 518 by Representative Clemens, a resolution to recognize Ulajade Ibatoya and other college students who have lost a parent or guardian to COVID-19 and to honor the memory of Mr. Ibatoya's mother, Terry Yolanda Ibatoya.
President. Representative Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 518.
Representative Clemens moves to concur in Senate Joint Resolution 518. Probably second, Mr. Clerk. Call up First Amendment.
House Amendment 1 by Chairman Faison, Mr. Speaker, was timely filed.
Representative Faison, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Amendment 1.
Representative Faison moves adoption of Amendment Number 1. Probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Any objection to the question? Any objection to a voice vote? All right. All those in favor of Amendment Number 1 say aye, aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. Just so everyone knows, the amendment that was just adopted eliminated a sentence in the last of the recitals that had read, "Let us rededicate ourselves to conquering COVID-19 through vaccination and education," and replaced it with, "We are grateful for the continued support and aggressive attack from Tennesseans to beat this virus." That was the context and substance of the amendment. And so with that, I would ask the clerk to read the resolution so everyone knows on what we're voting.
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, this is Senate Joint Resolution 518 as amended. Whereas it is fitting that we should extend our sympathy and offer our condolences to those Tennessee college students who have lost a family member to COVID-19 but have persevered in their studies and continue to work towards the completion of their respective degrees and credentials. And whereas Mr. Ibatoya, a senior at LeMoyne-Owen College and an intern for Senator Heidi Campbell during the 2021 legislative session, lost his mother, Terry Yolanda Ibatoya, to COVID-19 infectious respiratory disease on November 11, 2020. And whereas Mrs. Ibatoya was only 48 years of age at the time of her timely passing, and her death is a tragic loss for her family and indeed all of us as Tennesseans. And whereas a graduate Central High School in Memphis, Miss Ibatoya received her bachelor's degree in nursing degree and registered nurse certification from Baptist Health Science University and worked as a registered nurse at both the Baptist and Methodist hospitals while furthering her education. And whereas a woman truly devoted to the healing arts, Terry Ibatoya had earned her Master's of Science degree in nursing, advanced practice registered nurse certification, and most recently her board certification as an advanced practice psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and also as a licensed cosmetologist. And whereas during COVID-19, we are grateful for the continued support and aggressive attack from Tennesseans to beat this virus, and as we pay tribute to Miss Ibatoya's legacy as a gifted and compassionate medical professional and a loving wife and mother, now therefore be it resolved by the Senate of the 112th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the House of Representatives concurring, that we honor Ulajade Ibatoya and all other college students who have lost a parent or guardian to COVID-19, reflecting upon their strength and resolve in the face of personal tragedy. Be it further resolved that we honor the memory of Terry Yolanda Ibatoya and extend our sympathy and condolences to her husband, children, and other family members and friends.
Representative Clemens, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the original sponsors of this legislation in the Senate, Senators Gilmore, Campbell, and Ackberry, I renew my motion.
Representative Clemens renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Joint Resolution 518 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member cast their vote? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 92, no nays.
Senate Joint Resolution 518, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the regular calendar.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, the House has a message calendar.
Call up first message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 830 by Chairman Kumar relative to consumer protection.
Chairman Kumar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to lift from the table the motion to reconsider our concurrence in Senate Amendment Number 1.
Without objection, so ordered. Chairman Kumar.
I move to return House Bill 830 to the Senate for further correction of technical corrections. Mr. Speaker, I move to reconsider our action in concurrence.
Without objection, so ordered. Chairman Kumar.
I move to return House Bill 830 to the Senate for technical corrections.
Without objection, so ordered. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1233 by Chairman Zachary relative to education. Mr. Speaker, on April 21st, 2021, the Senate substituted House Bill 1233 for Senate Bill 1367, adopted Amendment 1, passed House Bill 1233 as amended.
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Amendment 1.
Chairman Zachary moves to concur in Senate Amendment Number 1, properly seconded. Discussion on the amendment. Any objection to the question? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senate Amendment Number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Take the vote, Ms. Clerk.
Aye, 70-22 nays.
Senate Amendment Number 1, having received a constitutional majority, I declare it concurred in without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1609 by Representative Weaver and others relative to Carthage. Mr. Speaker, on April 19, 2021, the Senate substituted House Bill 1609 for Senate Bill 490, adopted Amendment 1, passed House Bill 1609 as amended.
Chairman Weaver, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in the Senate Amendment Number 1, and basically there was a technical error when the bill was drafted. There were 3 words omitted in the table of contents. So again, I wish to concur to the Senate Amendment Number 1.
Chairman Weaver moves to concur in Senate Amendment Number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment Number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Take the vote, Ms. Clerk.
Aye, 73-14 nays, 1 present, non-voting.
Senate Amendment Number 1, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the message calendar.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Unfinished business.
Unfinished business. Representative Jernigan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After consulting with both leaders, I move that the rules be suspended for immediate introduction and consideration of House Resolution 86.
Mr. Clerk, please read the caption.
House Resolution 86 by Representative Jernigan, a resolution to honor Ron Beasley for his many contributions to Tennessee School for the Blind.
You've heard the caption. Any objections? Seeing none. Without objection, the rules are suspended. Representative Jernigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of House Resolution 86.
Representative Jernigan moves adoption of House Resolution 86, properly seconded. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Resolution 86 say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. I declare it adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is tabled. Representative Ogles, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Bill 1338 be heard on the next available calendar.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Representative Ogles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Bill 37 be heard on the next available calendar.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, we have some messages from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I'm directed to return the House Bill 368. The Senate refused to receive from its action in adopting Senate Amendment Number 1.
Tuesday's message calendar. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I'm directed to return to the House Bill 1016, substitute for the Senate bill on the same subject, amended and passed by the Senate.
Tuesday's message calendar. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I'm directed to return to the House Bill 240, substitute for the Senate bill on the same subject, amended and passed by the Senate.
Tuesday's message calendar. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, another message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I'm directed to return to the House Bill 79, substitute for the Senate bill on the same subject, amended and passed by the Senate.
Tuesday's message calendar. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the rules be suspended for immediate introduction and consideration of HJR 511.
Mr. Clerk, please read the caption.
House Joint Resolution 511 by Leader Lamberth, a resolution to call a joint convention of the Senate and the House of Representatives for the purpose of filling a vacancy on the State Election Commission pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Sections 211, Section 2-11-104 and 2-11-105.
You've heard the caption. Any objections? Without objection, the rules are suspended. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I should have mentioned that all of the motions I'll be making I'm making after in consultation with the minority leader. So with that, I move adoption of HJR number 511.
Leader Lamberth moves adoption of House Joint Resolution 511, properly seconded. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Joint Resolution 511 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. I declare it adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is tabled. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bills 1130, 1132, 157, 798 be heard in the Finance Subcommittee this week.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that House Bills 55, 750, 854, 341, 530, 729, 57, 1230, 1211, 516, 1010, 1150, 202, 150, and 599 be heard on tomorrow's consent calendar.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that House Bill 1633 be heard in the Local Government Committee this week.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Yeah. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move that the Finance Subcommittee calendar that was set for Wednesday, April the 28th, be heard tomorrow, Tuesday, April the 27th.
You've heard the motion. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Any further unfinished business? Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Announcements.
Announcements. Chairman Dixie.
Immediately after session ends, all the Democratic caucus, please meet me in the library down the hall. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Pastor Bill Geisel with the Capitol Commission will be the guest speaker Wednesday morning in the Wednesday morning devotion at 7:30 in House Hearing Room 3. Everyone is welcome. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Chairman Hicks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, if I can have your attention for just a second. As you heard the leader just a few minutes ago state that Wednesday's calendar will be taken up tomorrow. That will be tomorrow at 3:30. So if you had a bill on Wednesday's Finance Ways and Means sub-calendar, it will be taken up tomorrow at 3:30. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Any further announcements? Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Roll call.
Roll call. Williams. Clerk, please take the roll.
Mr. Speaker, 93 members present.
Next order, Mr. Clerk.
That completes the regular order, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Gant, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House stand in recess until 8:30 a.m. on Tuesday, April 27th, 2021.
Without objection, the House stands in recess till 8:30 a.m. on Tuesday, April 27th, 2021.